pronouns, and just kind of give their title and what they're working on right now. And I can start. My name is Felix Morton. I'm the student wellness coach, wellness specialist in the undergraduate business program at Kenan-Flagler Business School at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm really just hyped to be a part of this conversation as someone that's continuing to learn more about themselves and their own challenges and things that they're working on. And not just to figure out how to better support and be there for my students, but also how to support and be there for my colleagues and peers, because I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have something, that we're working on, that we're trying to grow through, or something that we're just trying to learn more about so that we can be better human beings. But yeah, so that's me, and I'll just kind of open it up to the rest of the group.
I can go.
Magnus, do you want to go next, or
Magnus, you want to go?
All right. Hi, I'm Magnus Hedemark. I'm right down the street in Raleigh, and I'm the Senior Director of Healthcare Cloud at United Health Group. That basically means I'm a software engineering manager. Have multiple software engineering teams reporting to me. I'm one of only a very small handful of openly autistic people at a company of 330,000.
Truman, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. So I'm Truman Mitchell. I'm a proud Canadian, as Melissa was kind of alluding to earlier, and a fifth-year senior at the one and only UBP. And for me personally, it's important. It's always been one of my core kind of tenets that, to kind of exude authenticity and honesty as often as possible. And I feel like it's not easy to do, especially not in our environment, but also not in general for, young adults and even older adults. So I think it's kind of, I want to make it a goal of mine to, try to be as honest as I can myself, and hopefully allow others to feel a bit more comfortable. So.
Yeah, appreciate you. Thanks, Truman.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Melissa Geil, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a clinical assistant professor of management and corporate communication here at Kenan-Flagler Business School. And I'm super grateful to Truman and Felix and Michael Penny and Anna Millar and the UBP for putting together this programming, which is a really important conversation, and I think a really good place to start. And I teach in the communications course and the core communications course in the undergrad business program. And I have research interests in disability and neurodiversity. And I'm really just excited to be here for our chat today.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, everybody. And I think that's a really good segue to just kind of opening up with defining what neurodiversity is, because I think it's really important just to acknowledge that for a lot of us, it's still a very new term. And I know some of the things that I've been able to research and kind of find on my own from what I've learned about neurodiversity, and if I look down, it's because I've kind of taken some notes over this week and I'm just kind of referring back to them, is that, it's under the umbrella of non-apparent disabilities. It's a concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. And it can include autism spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, and more. And I know that can be kind of technical and can still seem very inaccessible in the sense of trying to define it and understand it if it's something that's new for you. So I just kind of want to open it up to you all, and I would love to hear how you define neurodiversity to, your peers, your colleagues. And, we can start with Magnus, if you're cool with that.
Sure. Very cool with that. I think there's where a lot of folks get confused is there's neurodiversity, which is just a fact of nature. And then there's a neurodiversity movement. So when people say they disagree with neurodiversity, I think what they really mean is they disagree with the neurodiversity movement. But the fact of neurodiversity is that humans are born with a variety of different brains. There's a really dominant type, which a lot of us would call neurotypical, And then there are many different naturally occurring variants of it. I think what the neurodiversity movement is trying to recognize is that we've traditionally looked at those variants as being disordered or having a deficit somehow, when instead these variants very often have natural strengths of their own that aren't recognized because we're focused so much on what folks with these variants can't do as well as the dominant type. Like you might see, I struggle a little bit more with verbalizing my thoughts. I have to work hard for the words to come out, but that's no indication at all of what's happening up here.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Magnus. Truman, Melissa, you all.
Yeah, appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Magnus. Just kind of piggyback off of what he was saying. So I'm also, I previously meant to disclose, I'm also on the autism spectrum, was previously defined as Asperger's when I was younger, when I was first diagnosed. But so like, for example, one aspect that I struggled with heavily was social interaction. But because of that, I had to work so hard and to focus, when I was younger, I had to focus a lot on other people. So that made me actually a lot more kind of stronger at having a conversation with everybody, because I had practiced with adults and I focused so much on it in detail. So, just because, there are just certainly differences, but inherent in those differences are strengths that, just like everyone else, that come from either struggles or tribulations.
Sure. No, thank you so much, Truman.
And I mean, I think you all have addressed it beautifully. And I think what's happening, right, is that it's the destigmatization of perception of neurodiversity or people with things that are categorized as neurodiverse, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and even certain mental illness, debilitating panic disorders. Like there's a lot of things that can fall under this category. And having conversations like these are really important, because we start to figure out what kinds of things we need to, like attitudinal and institutional changes that these conversations can foster in order to make this world a more equitable and cooler place. Because all of the studies in the recent decade have shown that the more diversity of every type that you add to your organization, the more productive you are, the better ideas you have, and the better, the more money you make, if we're, paying homage to big capital here. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's going to be something that we definitely kind of target a little bit later in the conversation too, just based on some conversations that I've had with you all over the past week around the whole idea of fit versus substance, and how fit can usually equate to really meaning bias, and how different programs or companies kind of look at the people they're bringing in. But I do kind of want to rewind a little bit back to what Truman kind of hit on, not specifically anything he said, but just the idea that a lot of us have kind of come to understand what neurodiversity means and looks like from our different seats at different points. So I do want to ask just the entire group, what kind of was your first experience with neurodiversity, whether it was, during your personal life and education, business, and just feel free to share as much as you want or as little as you want.
I mean, I was born this way, so I guess
Sure.
I've always known that I was different, and anytime I started to forget that, people were really quick to remind me.
Yeah. And I
in
think,
terms of the neurodiversity movement,
sure.
I think the rise of social media made the community much more accessible. And I think for non-speaking autistics, it became a place to have an equal voice at the table. When you're talking to somebody on Twitter, you don't know if they can speak or if they're only able to communicate with a keyboard.
Absolutely.
So I think that's where we found community and found that the people who were advocating for us often had a very different agenda than we had for ourselves.
Sure.
Yeah, so I guess from my standpoint, I was, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunately, but here nor there, I was quite oblivious at an early age. So I was unaware probably until 7th grade. Obviously, my parents knew and I had a diagnosis, but like I always describe it this way, like I had a certain, I had a certain obliviousness to where like I didn't even know there was a social spectrum, let alone where I was on it. So, I would say once middle school hit, I was keenly aware, of kind of what, kind of that I was different, but also, eventually over time, obviously that, you met other people as well that are different, that are either neurodiverse or just simply unique in their own way. And that, that often softens kind of any feelings of, I guess, any feelings of isolation that you might, at least I would have potentially have had in the long run.
Sure.
Truman, would you say during those critical early school years that you were naturally drawn to other people who were like maybe, what's the word I'm looking for, like the social fringe?
Interesting question. So I've actually found that I kind of ironically, even presently in college, I found myself actually being almost inadvertently drawn to people that are, that I know whether or not they're aware, I'm kind of quite aware they're likely neurodiverse or openly neurodiverse. And so, yeah, definitely.
Radar. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. It's funny that you asked it because I'm not sure it's ever like I ever noticed it until like, it's just like all of a sudden, like I'm friends with someone.
Natural affinity.
Like, yeah, exactly. So if you don't mind me throwing the same exact question at you, I assume, do you have any kind of?
Yeah. And I think as you talk with more people who certainly on the autism spectrum, there are a lot of differences between us, and there's also a lot of commonalities. And I think one of the commonalities is that we might not always know what's different about us, but we recognize the same qualities in others. So while I might have to work a lot harder for a friendship, for a relationship with somebody who would be described as neurotypical, it's much, much easier often to have friendships, relationships that aren't burdened in any way with other people who might be social outliers. And then I think that we've got cousins, ADHD folks very often. There's like easy friendships between autistic folks and ADHD folks. So yeah, I guess I've noticed some similar patterns.
Interesting.
So I'm coming at this from a teaching perspective from a lot of things. So for the most part, I'm deferring to Truman and Magnus because my perspective is different. And although I will, so a lot of what I bring to the table is learned from the mistakes I've made, dealing with having students who are neurodiverse or in need or have an invisible disability. And, the kind of awakening for me, was when I had a family member basically become disabled and has an invisible disability now and doesn't disclose it at work. And I became their advocate for a long time. And it changed my perspective. And also I was really traumatized by it as well. And I felt like because of that experience, I was not only more able to see things more as they are, but also students started coming to me. And I didn't feel that I had changed as a teacher at all, but I think I was much less tolerant of facades and kind of, am I allowed to curse in this forum?
Absolutely.
Kind of bullshit. Like I just was like, I was done with bullshit. I was done with the lying. And when you were speaking about like has to like, my uncle, my uncle is on the autism spectrum, diagnosed with Asperger's later in life. And then I have a bunch of tendencies, like I sit next to stimmers because I can't stop fidgeting. I was teased by my siblings because I have trichotillomania, which if you don't know what this is, like you pull out hair. And so it's just, you wind up finding your people. And I just was like, we all are as we are, and that is good enough. And so then I just started fighting harder for accommodations for my students, but also trying not to make them have to fight for them. And this is what I think we're going to lead to talking about maybe eventually, which is that inclusive teaching practices for people with neurodiversity are just inclusive teaching practices that are better for everybody. And that that's the end game, is just you want your teaching to be as good as possible. And those practices don't just benefit people with ASD, like they benefit everybody. And so not to say that I'm wonderful at it, it's just say I'm trying to get better every time. And so with that, I'm going to defer back to my good friends.
No, I thank you for sharing that. And then also too, you bring up a really good point in the sense of we're only speaking from our individual perspectives. We have to acknowledge intersectionality. We have to acknowledge the fact that Magnus and Truman don't speak for all people that identify as neurodiverse. They don't speak for all white men that identify as neurodiverse. I don't speak for all Black men or just helping professionals, period. You don't speak for all professional educators or higher educators or professors in academia. We're literally just coming to the space, bringing our individual perspectives and things that we've learned. And I too, feel like my best teacher in any of this have been the mistakes that I've made, the questions that I've asked, the things that I've been able to be a part of. So thank you for highlighting that piece as well. And I'm very similar, in the sense of I feel like I've learned a lot more about neurodiversity as a construct over the past year. I feel like throughout my time in education and counseling, I feel like, I'm not sure if a lot of people can relate to the sense of we hear about these different things, but we don't know there's a term for that, or we don't know there's a house for this. In K-12, we talk about, working with autistic students. We talk about learning disabilities. We talk about our students that have ADHD, and we talk about it as a certain way. And then you come over to the world of student affairs and higher ed, the magical world. And the conversations for some reason appear like they have to seem different or they have to be different. But the reality, like some of my colleagues kind of said today at work, like these should just be conversations. This should just be stuff that we talk about, period. But also don't want to dominate the conversation either. This kind of, some of the things that you all were bringing up right then, I also were just kind of leading to a lot more of the topics that I thought could come up, and some of the things that we've talked about, because I don't want this to feel very transactional or like I ask a question, you hopefully answer, and then we have blank stares at each other like what the hell is going to happen next. So I'm gonna just kind of throw out, exactly, Magnus, but like I'm gonna throw out just some of the topics that I feel like have come across in our different conversations, just to kind of get your insight. But a lot of them, some of the heavy hitters, I think, over the past week, for one, kind of go back to strategies with teaching, strategies in working with students, working with each other as professionals and colleagues, disclosure, so I think the first that I kind of wanted to get you all's insight on was the whole idea around that deficit lens versus capacity lens, and how you have kind of viewed that from your respective field, whether it's in business, your seat, or your identity as a student, or even your identity and seat as a professor. So feel free, have at it. Would love to hear your thoughts.
I have them, but Truman, I've been jumping on everyone first, so I'll yield to you first.
You might have better thoughts. I'm just trying to think on that question. So if someone else wants to jump in, I appreciate it.
Building on the disclaimer that each of us only speaks for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I take issue with some of the language that's frequently used about autistic folks being high functioning or low functioning. This is a common pain point for many in our community. And the way I look at it is, if you say that somebody is high functioning, you see them for their abilities, but you're ignoring their needs. And if you say that somebody's low functioning, you see them only for their needs and don't see their abilities. And everybody, not just autistic people, everybody has abilities and needs. They're not special needs, they're just needs. And I think I've had much more fulfilling experiences as a leader working with people, just trying to ask people, like, what do you need to do your best work here? And that's whether you're autistic or not. Somebody might say, I need to work from home, or I need to have a headset for Zoom calls, or I need to have a desk with my back facing the wall because I've got PTSD from my service, it almost doesn't even matter why, but if they're reasonable things, I'm probably fast forwarding to the adjustments conversation. I guess what I was getting at is, when you're talking about the autistic population, we may be like early indicators that something is wrong, but the kinds of things, building on what Melissa was saying, the kinds of things that help us to be more included and do our life's best work are also the kind of things that make the workplace more accessible, more productive, inclusive to everybody else. Did I go off on a tangent? Did that answer the question?
Oh, no, absolutely. Go ahead, Truman.
Yeah, no, if it was a tangent, it was a very eloquent one. So I don't think it was, though. But no, yeah, I think so I think from the standpoint of, like, kind of going off of what Magnus was saying, it's important to have, like, have discussions with everyone, and not kind of not kind of narrow the lens down to labels, whether it be things like high whether it be like high performing, low performing, or even in general. You should just, I always look at things as collective humanity. And I think that's something we all need to learn to respect better. Because I've never looked at other people as anything more, anything less than human. Like, that's been my perspective. Maybe that's because of the challenges I've had, but like, I don't deem the barista that works at Starbucks any different than the person that, quite frankly, is my CEO. There's obviously different, like, in a professional sense, there's different things, but in terms of how you treat them in the stage of conversation, I think you have to, it's always good to just, treat everyone with respect and try to get to know people and figure out what their needs are. And I think that should be the case for everyone. And by doing that, by proxy, perhaps you could be benefiting certain communities, and even neurodiverse communities. But I think that's kind of the important thing from my perspective. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a tangent as well.
Oh, no, that was eloquent.
And I think it's the sort of where you're meeting people, right? And this is what you're saying is, like, you meet people wherever they're at, and you don't presume a certain, like, the deficit lens kind of thing focuses on competencies, right? What are the competencies that we need to meet? And if you don't meet those, you have a deficit. And so this is the language post my family member's stroke. What are your deficits? And it's like, oh, well, you have a language deficit and you have a deficit here. It's like, well, let's not focus on that. Instead, let's think about where they're at now and what do we need. And one of the things that this is related to, both with teaching and with the business community, is job ads that are really ableist, but that list competencies that they don't really need to list. Like, if you're looking for a software engineer, do you really need communication skills, and what is that competency defined as? If their nonverbal communication is excellent, does that work? But then through a traditional interview process, right, one could see how that person would be weeded out by an inability to have a conversation verbally with their interviewer. And So thinking through more of a capacity lens, what do we really need, and what is this person able to do, with us, for us, and how can they contribute, and how can we meet each person where they're at, I think is something that is to be considered. And for me as a teacher, my focus is, I've been turning my attention a lot to our grading rubrics, and how those in themselves are inherently ableist when it comes to presentation standards.
Sure. No, thank you so much. And I think everything that you all are talking about right now just kind of leads into that other topic that me and Magnus originally had talked about, with the curb cut effect, which was something new for me. And once you kind of schooled me on it, I was like, yo, this is a dope term. Like, and it's not even that this is just really cool, but it just makes sense. Like, I feel like sometimes when we think about the way that we interact with people, the way that we communicate, because that's always been my biggest flaw or error, is my bias or implicit bias or assumption that people are just going to automatically understand what I'm saying. And I don't know if that's me being, ignorant sometimes, or me being from Eastern North Carolina. So, it could be a mix of both. But like, can you just kind of go through the curb cut effect as well, again,
Sure.
just for everybody?
And this is something we've been dancing around a few times during this conversation already.
Absolutely.
It's the idea that, like, when you're walking down Franklin Street,
Yeah.
and you come to the intersection, and at the edge of the sidewalk dips down to meet the street level. And these were put at every intersection to make the sidewalks and intersections accessible to wheelchair users. Okay. But the unintended effect, the unintended benefit, is that all kinds of other people are now making use of it. You're on a bicycle, a skateboard, you're pushing a baby carriage, or pulling a wheeled, briefcase. There's so many reasons why, traveling around by foot or by bike or by skateboard is now easier, because of this accessibility adjustment that was made for a very small part of the population. Now our city streets are made better for everyone. So they call that the curb cut effect.
Yeah, and it's so cool, and it ties a lot into everything that we're talking about now. But it's just helping me kind of remember some of the previous conversations we've had, especially when Melissa and I were talking about teaching, and just considerations. And a lot of this, it's kind of been already asked, and I know like a lot of faculty are just curious themselves. How do we find ways to make our teaching strategies, our materials more considerate, more inclusive. And I think, when we hear about that, it's just a matter of really understanding that and what it looks like. And I know, Melissa, you've said that there have been ways that you've tried to implement some of those ideas that you've picked up on, and just some things that you've kind of learned yourself.
Yes, I'd be happy to start it off, and then I'd love to hear what Magnus and Truman have found useful as well. Part of one of the mistakes I made, or one of the kind of aha moments I had, was when I was teaching a class, and I had a student who had a simultaneous translator. She was hard of hearing and had someone, and so I'd never worn a mic. And so every time I walk into class, she mic'd me up. But I used a lot of clips. It was a Shakespeare class. And I realized that my clips, I had to make sure that those clips had to be captioned. Hi, Shamal. Those clips needed to be closed captioned, because otherwise, the translator listening to something that's playing over the computer and coming through. And so that was one of the things. But those closed captioning, that helps a lot for everybody else in that class. With something like Shakespeare, seeing the words, because sometimes they're not going to understand the accent. Someone who is, maybe just at the back of the class and having a hard time hearing because the person next to them is having a conversation. Or say you're trying to watch it at home while putting your kids to sleep, which I love closed captioning for that. It's this effect that closed captioning just helps with comprehension for everyone, not just people who are hard of hearing. And then one of the things that I plugged when I was talking to Felix is that we have an Office of Inclusive Teaching. Kelly Hogan and Dr. Sathi are both really great. And there's an article from the Chronicle that they've written for the Chronicle several times about inclusive teaching. And, you know, just in terms of sharing material in advance, having copies of your PowerPoint slides ahead of time, offering multiple ways for students to participate. And so anything that, you know, having polls or using the chat or having a Google sheet that people can take notes on. There's lots of different ways to share that material. You know, in terms of class participation, making sure that your participation grade isn't just based on the people who talk in class. How clearly define what constitutes participation and consider having a different ways in which that a student could participate. And now, of course, in my head, I'm looking at Greg Hone and thinking, how does that work for improv class? And so I think you need to tailor it to what your particular topic is. But at the very least, start having a conversation about ways to do this. And also asking what actually would be helpful for me to do. So now I'm asking Truman and Magnus, like, what else can I be doing that would be helpful?
Those were great ideas so far. I use captions myself, and I'm hard of hearing, but I think also because of being autistic, it's hard to follow fast moving conversations. So the captions really help there. I think since I'm guessing we're probably talking mostly to business students, one of the things that you can start thinking about now to be effective leaders yourselves is, how do I hold an effective meeting? And that starts with the invitation. Who do you invite to the meeting? What are the objectives? As Melissa was saying, like, can you preload the invitation with some of the materials that you'll be reviewing for somebody who's autistic or somebody who might have some other invisible disability, or really anybody? Like, who wouldn't want to know what we're talking about? Who wouldn't want to know what the objectives are? So I might need it, but it's going to be really helpful for everybody else that you invite, and your meeting is going to go much more effectively.
Yeah, I think going from Magnus said, I think that applies to the the realms of students as well in academia. Like, I know personally, I only shared it in like the fact that I was autistic like 3 times in a large group. I've told my friends, I have no problem with that personally. But one of those times, well, the first time at the business school was in Greg's class, and part of the reason why I felt comfortable, able to do that was because of how clear kind of the parameters of his class were, but also and also kind of the culture that was kind of set within that class. So I think, invitations are important. How you kind of set things up are essential, because, that can make every bit of difference. Because, what made me comfortable to share, that's just what I consider being my vulnerability. Can make other people comfortable to share their vulnerability too, whether or not they're neurodiverse. It's irrelevant in that regard.
Absolutely. And I think Truman has the perfect kind of segue as well into another probably the biggest topic that we'll talk about, especially regarding neurodiverse and just being able to acknowledge anything that you're willing, is that idea of disclosure. And when is it safe? Is it necessary? Should you disclose? Should you not? And I feel like it's a very important topic, especially for this group, because of the identities that you all share. You all have different experiences from your respective seats. So feel free to chime in on just any general thoughts. And also, just so I know I'm keeping track of time, questions are starting to come in. So I will start to kind of bring some of those questions in as they flow into the different topics. But I know disclosure, from the conversations I've had, especially with Truman and Magnus, have been very heavy. So please feel free to share.
Magnus, can I ask you a question in that vein?
Sure.
If you don't mind. So oftentimes, like from a student's perspective in academia, label, like having the label component can be helpful from an accommodation standpoint.
Yes.
But, you know, it's often the skeptic in me, and I think it's skeptic a lot of people that make it feel like oftentimes it can be perceived as not being helpful or even a detriment in the business world. I'm wondering if you can shine a bit of light on where it's appropriate and where you deem it to be, I guess, appropriate and where it's not to disclose the business world.
So fair warning, I'm a bit of a radical on this subject.
Mm-hmm.
Even among other autistic professionals I work with, I mentioned that there are only 3 people, I'm sorry, 3 leaders in total at United Health Group that are out. We're not the only autistic people in leadership roles, but the only ones that are out. The calculus of disclosure is heavily weighted in favor of staying in the closet. And I think as all of you become emerging leaders, something you need to think about, not just for this population, but for everybody who's dealing with some kind of challenge. How do we tip the scales? Right now, the risks of disclosure are really high and the potential benefits of disclosure are very low. How do we flip it the other way? How do we take the risk out of disclosure and incentivize it? Like, hey, just disclosing your condition, your needs, is the beginning of the conversation around setting you up for success. Okay. For me, I'm so out, I can never go back in again. But for a lot of the people around me, it's still really, really scary. And I think, yes, there's a stigma out there still. And yes, there's a really good chance you're going to have a boss that isn't going to be accommodating, even though they're legally required to accommodate. I disclose in the interview process, early in the interview process, because I know my interviewer is going to pick up that there's something different about me they can't quite make out. I can get up enough nerve to fake a handshake, but I hate handshakes. I can, through my glasses, I can make it look like I'm making eye contact, even though I'm focusing on the edge of my glasses. I've got these little adaptations, but a lot of people can't make eye contact. They can't fake it. They can't do the handshakes. So they wash out of the interview. So I advocate disclosing the interview for the purpose of making that conversation go fluidly without the other person wondering, what's up with this person? You know, why are they so odd? And secondly, the interview isn't just for the employer to figure out whether they want to hire the candidate. It's for the candidate to figure out, do I want to work here in the first place? Mm-hmm. And for me, that's an opportunity to see, how are these people I'm potentially going to work with going to react to having an autistic person around? How are they going to react to me having some like very specific needs around what kind of workplace I need to be successful? So it's tough, it's hard, it's a personal decision, but I advocate doing it early and often, and just know that you might lose a job, but you're probably dodging a bullet at the same time.
And I think on top of that, Magnus, I do want to ask too, just based on, you know, your experience out here being in the field now, you know, are there any employers that you feel like are leading in that space in terms of both recruitment and supporting neurodiverse employees?
Ultranauts is my favorite. Ultranauts, I'm good friends. Actually, they've tried recruiting me a few times for the senior leadership team, but their CEO is neurotypical, co-founder is neurotypical, but my gosh, they have done the most amazing work in this space. 75% of their workforce self-identifies as neurodivergent in some way. 45% of the employee population identifies as not cis male. And at every step of the way, they're very transparent with their employees. They're very proactive about communications, giving people like a lot of time to digest information before decisions are made. Mm-hmm. And they're always asking the whole time, like, how can we get better at this? And giving employees a proactive voice. They have a tool internally they call the Biodex that is used for like people can share whatever they want to disclose with their coworkers.
Sure.
Hey, here's who I am. Here's the way I would prefer you communicate with me. Like you might be able to come up to me face to face, and I'm generally okay most of the time.
Mhm.
But some people like can't deal with that, and they want you to send an email or they want you to send a direct message. The Biodex is the tool that allows them to do that. They have other tools for things like every day there's kind of a temperature check on like, how are you feeling? Do you need help? So I love everything about them, and I hope they open source the way they work. I'm constantly pushing them to do that. I think the way they manage their workforce is their biggest asset.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead,
Truman,
Mike.
this was the company I think I showed you the Biodex on the screen. That this is I love this company. And I copied, so that Biodex, I copied it for a feedback kind of construction for my business 401 class that I'm going to try next fall, where it was like, what are your goals? What are your concerns? How would you like to receive feedback? And are there accommodations or anything that we can help you, do in order to do your best? Like, what do you need to do your best in this class? And yeah, I love them. I know, like, there's also, I think SAP is a mover in this space, but I don't know. That's just from articles I've read.
There's all right. I'm going to spill
please
the tea.
Give us the tea.
I'm going to
yes,
spill
please.
the tea. So there's what I call the Neurodiversity 1.0 movement. Neurodiversity 1.0 is employers, people mean well. They're trying to do the right thing. So I'm not disparaging any people here, but it's usually neurotypical leaders hiring a very slim cut of the autistic population, like the most, commercially desirable part of the autistic population to do like very specific jobs, usually in tech. There's usually not like a clear path for career growth. There's usually not opportunities for people with higher support needs or other neurodivergent conditions like Tourette syndrome. Folks with Tourette's, like, how do you even get through an interview when the high stress of the situation is causing like an explosion of tics? So I don't see them doing anything in this space. So I think Neurodiversity 2.0 is where you start seeing organizations like Ultranauts. And when I say one thing I didn't even mention, they've got neurodiversity in their senior leadership team. So it's not just like a neurotypical ruling class with, a bunch of autistic workforce underneath of them. It's like top to bottom. So SAP, important leader in the space. Their Autism at Work program is important. It's groundbreaking, but what have you done for me lately? I think there are other companies that we could probably look at that are doing more. And ask me again in a few months about United Health Group.
And then also kind of just going back to some things Melissa said around teaching, I did want to just welcome Greg to the space to kind of share some things that he wanted to offer as well to the group. So thanks for chiming in. Feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Well, thanks for asking me. So I find myself very moved when I talk about this. And I guess it makes sense considering what I'm going to talk about. But I feel that if you're going to allow people to be vulnerable, you've got to be vulnerable yourself. And I'm not saying that I get choked up every time I start a class, but, seeing Truman here today, Truman was just amazing in my class, all right? And what he did was he shared his vulnerability with us. And in the process, made everybody else open up. He was willing to go there, wherever there is. And his display of courage and boldness was contagious. And everybody wanted to be like, well, hell yeah, if Truman's going there, I want to go there. All right. And, you know, you shared some of what you were going through with the rest of us. And like, what can I say? It was amazing. It's moving to me, obviously. And, you know, Truman and I talked a little bit, and I hope I'm not breaking any confidences here, but, you know, in class, he would like chat me privately and say like, hey, can I talk to you after class? Or, hey, I'm having a bad day. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Let's talk. You know, I'm not a specialist in this. I'm not an expert in this. But for me, what we all have to do, and Truman also mentioned this too, we've got to have that attitude. Well, it's the golden rule. Treat other people with dignity and respect, regardless of what the power structure is. Have a genuine curiosity about people. As an instructor, I think it's important to build into what you're doing opportunities for people to speak, not just where they can speak, but actually so they have to speak. And I also can understand where we might have to make allowances or create opportunities so that people are comfortable with that. But it's just like, no. So in my classes, we start every meeting with like, we go around, there's a theme question, we all answer it. And sometimes they're just super silly and sometimes they're more serious, and usually they kind of sequentially build on each other. And I also just wanted to mention something that Magnus said that really resonated with me, because one of my goals as a professor in my class is to get people to value who they are. I've said the same thing. I said, Magnus, every class I've taught, I've said the same thing. Remember, a job interview isn't just about you selling you to them. They've got to sell you. And I said, you know, that one of our goals in life is to find out where we belong best. And that's a painful process, but you kind of got to let your freak flag fly, whatever your freakiness is, okay? Because we all got freaky stuff going on. I remember when I was teaching at Duke, I had a student who was this white kid, president of his fraternity, and one day he wanted to talk to me after class and said, hey man, I just wanted to talk to you, you know, like sometimes I don't feel like I belong here. I'm like, I wanted to say, dude, if anybody belongs here, it's you. But the thing is, that's the internal life. So I know I'm going on a little bit here, but what I really want to, the point I'm trying to make with all of this is that we have to be empowered to share who we are, and we have to get support. And I think we can do that in the classroom, because the price of hiding out and not being who you are is much greater than the price of rejection, whether it's a job or a relationship or whatever that thing might be. And the thing is, like the most typical, the straightest, the cissest, whatever, we all are dealing with this, and we've got to help each other be open with that. So anyway, thank you for asking. I didn't have anything prepared there, but I just did want to share with you that, and maybe, who knows, you know, maybe even Truman has, or Magnus, you know, maybe they have some more tips about like what's worked in, you know, Magnus has talked about the workplace, you know, Truman, maybe you have some perspective about what works in the classroom.
Brief yes and. Like
yes,
you said,
yes and yes and.
Yes, and you know, make room for yourself to be your true self, but also make sure you're making room for others around you to be their true self. Protect that space for them. And my gosh, if you make it up the elevator, send the elevator back down.
Oh, I love that.
That's perfect. Honestly, like the only time I've truly like considered myself to suffer in my life was when it is in hiding, is in kind of self-inflicted isolation. You know, when given the opportunity to be myself and to explore who I am and figure all that shit out, no matter how much baggage there might be there, I've never been like internally unhappy, even if I don't like everything I see. So like having, amazing like people like Greg that are willing to, create environments like that and make a world of difference. So I want to thank you first off for your, obviously, because it starts there. So
this is why I love this shit. Like this is why we do stuff like this. And I want to flip it back too and say thank you, Greg. And also I'm trying to do better by living the mindset of we have to give people the roses while they're in front of us. And this conversation would not be a thing if Truman, you didn't bring it up. We have to acknowledge the fact that conversations like these need to happen. And literally you coming to us in the UBP and saying like, hey, I'm trying to find a way to just make room for others, like make this a part of the normal lifestyle of how we operate at Kenan-Flagler, like in the UBP, how we just be. We talk about our different guiding principles. And, when I look at them, since I'm new, I'm still kind of learning them. But the big thing I get is just being who you are. And I just wanted to make sure I give you your roses too, man, because this is amazing work. And I just want to kind of go back and follow up on what Greg said to you, Truman. But and then also I'm trying to be mindful of time because I know people have to pull out 6 o'clock, or if some people need to stay back and just kind of ask questions and talk a little bit more, we can. But kind of as some closing thoughts or a final question, just in case people have to go. Pretty much, why was it, or why is it important to you to be a part of this conversation in the UBP at Kenan-Flagler? And Truman, we can start with you because, like I said, I gotta give you your roses, man.
Well, man, first I want to say I appreciate that, man, but it takes two and for everything, right? It takes one to talk and one to listen. So, and I appreciate you guys being willing to listen. Obviously, it's just, it's everything, man. It's like, I didn't have the easiest time my first year and a half, probably 2 years, quite frankly. Like I'm a 5th year student, right, at the UBP. It's probably been the last, quite frankly, year and a half where I feel like I've come into myself and as an individual. But like I struggled like hell to start off, and I don't want other people to, and I felt quite isolated from my fellow classmates as well. I didn't feel very welcomed or very together, and I don't want other people to have to walk down that same path necessarily. I want to make it easier for them, and if we can do that by fucking just being open, being ourselves, and like I don't know why the hell we wouldn't. So yeah, that's just my perspective on it.
Absolutely.
I don't know how we got through this whole hour with me having the cleanest mouth of the bunch. It's really off brand.
And that's I gotta make sure we have a shameless plug. I'm going to be posting different resources. We have a follow-up survey for those that could attend to please fill out to give us feedback. Shameless plug for Magnus's podcast series that I highly recommend. There is a educational version, and then there's a
hot take
adult
version.
Yeah. But yes, Magnus, Melissa, what are your kind of closing thoughts? Just because I want to be mindful of your time too.
Melissa, you go first.
Yeah, we gotta get the hot take as the last thing. A couple things I did post. So I had read an article about reveal or conceal the pros of disclosure in the workplace, and it's from the Neurodiversity Hub. Magnus can yay or nay it. If it's a terrible piece, you can nix it from the thing. But I thought it was pretty good. It had advantages and disadvantages that were good. Sort of final thoughts is that this, I'm seeing who all is here and that who came to this talk, and I loved. I know we had Greg, but I would love to have there's so many other versions of this conversation that I think would really, I see Amy Bugno, and I'd really love to talk about neurodiversity and career recruiting. We've had Greg talk, but I really think that, and I see Kate here, who is a UBP alum who now works. She's getting a doctorate in occupational therapy, but she's also working in with neurodiversity. I see all of you, and I see Shamul. I think she maybe hopped off, but she's she and Anna and Truman and Michael, and you guys all started Spark, right, to help students feel, I think, you know, Truman's experience not feeling at home in the UBP when he got over here was something that I didn't feel at home when I first came here either. And that wasn't because my area wasn't super supportive, but it was just, I didn't understand why the students were all so stressed out and competing with each other. And we've really been working to change that. But, you know, I think Truman and I we had a discussion, was like, oh, wait, there's something toxic about something that's happening here that needs to get fixed. But without that conversation, and I think, you know, it's really such, I mean, Truman, you are leaving this place better than you found it. And I guess my final thought is, like, I'm super grateful that I had you in a class your sophomore year. And thank you for kind of bringing me along this journey, because I've got further to go, as do you. We're going maybe in different directions, but yeah, so I'm really just happy that I got to know you, and thank you for starting this talk.
So I guess closing thoughts, I'd have to close with a hot take. So I'm really grateful to be here with all of you. If you're curious to learn more about how to be good allies to neurodiverse population, especially the autistic population, just be aware, advocacy wise, for most other groups you can think of, the people that are being talked about are the people who are advocating. In other words, like if you're talking about women, if you're talking about people of color, if you're talking about the LGBTQ population, usually the people who are doing the talking about it are part of that community. When we talk about autism, most of the loudest advocacy out there does not come from autistic people. And so I would just advise, be respectful of who the people in the community really are. It's usually not the parents of autistic children. All of those children grow up and become adults, and we remain autistic, and we speak for ourselves. And we often have very, very different things to say than our parents would have said on our behalf when we were kids. So I do not recommend getting your advice from Autism Speaks. I would recommend instead the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network is run entirely by autistic women and non-binary folks, and the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is the other. That's, I think, probably more comprehensive. And just since Felix mentioned my podcast, I don't really like promoting, but Neuroverse is one that I host where I'm just interviewing other people who have like one or more different neurodivergent conditions, and usually some other angle of intersectionality. And then Autism First Language is where I just, get a hot spark in my pants and I have to rant about something, usually autism related. So that's Autism First Language and Neuroverse. That's it.
And like I said, we'll be sharing all of our resources that we have with the group. Michael is sharing the feedback survey now. And like I said, I thank everybody for being a part of this talk. This was our first one of the series. I hope that you all got something out of it. Thank you to the members that kind of joined me on my virtual couch. And I guess my final thought or kind of takeaway for everybody, especially my UBP family, is, with our UBP guiding principles in mind, the be curious, be purposeful, be kind, be agile, be humble, be true. How are you utilizing those guiding principles to consider neurodiversity in your studies, your work, and most importantly, your life? So it's nothing we have to answer right now. It's just a rock to put in your shoe. And thank you again for spending your Wednesday evening with me. If anybody needs to follow up, please feel free to hit me up. But other than that, you all have a good evening.
And thank you very much, Felix and
Thank you.
and Michael for helping set this up. And thank you, Magnus, so much for being generous with your time, man. It's
Anytime.
it's a pleasure virtually meeting you. So.
Absolutely. Yes. No, thank you for collaborating. Thank you for everybody collaborating. and I'll be hanging back as people leave. So if anybody needs to hang back and talk to me or anything like that, feel free.
I can stay for Q&A if that's